With his blistering bright solos and a self-styled flair for rock, Eddie Van Halen became one of music's greatest guitar players. The founding member of the hugely successful band, named after him.
You know? Yeah. And he played me all this diverse stuff, and I'm going, I'd really like to be a part of this.
At 33, Eddie Van Halen's son Finley confirms what's suspected all along. At 33, Wolfgang Van Halen finally shattered the silence about his father's last days. Van Halen doesn't exist anymore, and it shouldn't. In an emotional revelation, he exposed the truth about Eddie's secret battle with cancer, their final recording sessions, and why he's refusing millions for a reunion tour. But the most heartbreaking confession? The last promise he made to his dad, and why he can never break it. Eddie Van Halen was born on January 26, 1955, in Amsterdam, Netherlands. His father, Jan, was a jazz musician, and his mother, Eugenia, was from Indonesia. Life wasn't easy for their family in the Netherlands. People treated them badly because Jan and Eugenia were from different races. Hoping for a better life, they decided to move to the United States. In 1962, they packed a few bags, brought $15, and took a piano with them. They sailed on a ship for 9 days. During the trip, Eddie, his brother Alex, and their father played music for the passengers to help pay for their tickets. Nobody knew that little Eddie would one day become a rock legend. When they arrived in America, life didn't get much easier. They moved to Pasadena, California, but the family was very poor. Eddie's dad worked as a janitor and dishwasher, walking 6 miles to work every day. His mom cleaned houses to help pay the bills. Eddie and Alex didn't know English, and they were bullied at school for being different. But even with all these problems, music stayed important to their family. Their dad made sure Eddie and Alex took piano lessons, even though money was tight. Eddie didn't like reading sheet music, so he learned to play by ear. He became so good that he won piano competitions 3 years in a row. Eddie wasn't always interested in the guitar. At first, he played the drums, and Alex played the guitar. But one day, Alex surprised Eddie by playing a drum solo from the song Wipe Out. Eddie realized Alex was better at drums, so they switched instruments. That decision changed Eddie's life. He spent hours practicing guitar every day, often skipping school to play in his room. He didn't just play the guitar, he experimented. He came up with new techniques, like two-handed tapping, which would become his signature style. He also used what he learned from piano to make his guitar playing different and exciting. By the early 1970s, Eddie and Alex started a band called Mammoth. They played shows around Pasadena and rented a sound system from David Lee Roth, a confident and flashy singer. Roth had a big personality and knew how to put on a show. The brothers decided to ask him to join the band. Roth even came up with the idea to change the band's name to Van Halen. It sounded unique and highlighted Eddie and Alex's talent. Soon after, they added bassist Michael Anthony, who brought great backing vocals and a solid bass sound. This completed the classic Van Halen lineup. The band worked hard, playing clubs all over Los Angeles. They became known for their energy and Eddie's incredible guitar solos. People couldn't believe the sounds Eddie made with his guitar. They thought it was a synthesizer.
Few could match his speed or his influence to an entire generation of guitarists.
In 1977, during one of their live shows, executives from Warner Brothers saw them perform. They were blown away by Eddie's talent and the band's energy. Right there, Van Halen was offered a recording contract. In 1978, Van Halen released their first album, Van Halen. It was recorded quickly, in just 3 weeks, but it captured the band's live energy perfectly. The first song, Runnin' with the Devil, showed off their bold sound. Then came Eruption, a short guitar solo that left everyone speechless. Eddie's two-handed tapping was something nobody had heard before. It inspired a whole new generation of guitarists. The album also included a cover of "You Really Got Me" by the Kinks, which became a hit on the radio. The album was a massive success. It sold over 10 million copies in the US and made Van Halen one of the hottest bands in rock. Eddie became famous almost overnight. Critics called him a guitar genius, and fans couldn't get enough of his playing. The band went on tour, opening for big names like Journey, and they often stole the spotlight with their energetic performances. By the end of 1978, Van Halen was one of the most exciting bands in the world, and Eddie Van Halen was already a legend. The Frankenstrat is one of the most famous guitars in rock history. It shows Eddie Van Halen's creativity and his do-it-yourself attitude. This unique guitar came to life because Eddie wanted something better than the guitars available at the time. He wanted a guitar that combined the best parts of two iconic models, the Fender Stratocaster and the Gibson Les Paul. In 1974, Eddie started building the Frankenstrat. He bought a Strat-style body for $50 from Wayne Charvel's shop. It was a factory second, made of heavy northern ash, and weighed about 5.5 pounds. For the neck, he spent $80 on a maple one with a flatter and wider fretboard, more like a Gibson neck than a Fender. This mix of a Fender-style body with a Gibson-inspired neck was unheard of back then, and later inspired many guitar designs in the 1980s. The most important change Eddie made was to the pickups. He didn't like the thin sound of regular Stratocaster pickups, so he carved out the body to fit a Gibson PAF humbucker. This pickup, taken from an old Gibson ES 335, gave the guitar a strong and thick tone that defined Eddie's sound. To make it work, he had to angle the pickup, which accidentally created a new and special tone. The guitar's famous look came over time. At first, Eddie painted it black. Then, he used masking tape to make a striped pattern and spray painted it white. Later, in 1979, he added red paint, creating the red, black, and white design that everyone associates with him. Eddie also kept improving the hardware. In 1977, he added a Floyd Rose tremolo system, which allowed for dramatic pitch shifts. He even glued a 1971 quarter to the guitar's body to stop the tremolo from moving too far. These small details made the Frankenstrat both practical and unique. Eddie's music is just as legendary as his guitar. His solos and riffs became part of rock's foundation. One of the most famous is Eruption, released in 1978 on Van Halen's first album. This solo, lasting only 1 minute and 42 seconds, changed guitar playing forever. It starts with fast arpeggios, showing Eddie's skill with alternate picking, then shifts into his signature two-handed tapping technique. This creates a flurry of notes that amazed everyone. The solo ends with harmonics and dramatic whammy bar dives. Eruption became a must-learn for rock guitarists and is ranked as one of the greatest guitar solos ever. Another incredible solo is in Panama from Van Halen's 1984 album. The solo begins at 2:11 in the song, with a rapid series of hammer-ons and pull-offs. It feels both energetic and controlled. Eddie uses tapping again, but this time it blends into the song's melody instead of standing out on its own. The solo ends with expressive bends and creative whammy bar effects that match the song's high-energy vibe. What makes this solo special is how it fits perfectly into the song, adding excitement without taking over. Meanwhile, Van Halen became one of the biggest rock bands in the late 70s and early 80s. Their first album, Van Halen, came out in 1978 and was a huge hit. Over the next 5 years, the band released 5 more multi-platinum albums: Van Halen 2, Women and Children First, Fair Warning, Diver Down, and 1984. What made this even more amazing was how fast they worked. Each album took only 2 weeks to record. While other bands took long breaks, Van Halen kept recording and touring non-stop. This hard work showed how much they loved making music and how well they worked together. By 1982, they had already released 4 albums that sold millions. Very few bands have done something like that. Their music changed with each album. In Women and Children First, Eddie Van Halen played a new instrument, an electric piano, along with his guitar. Fair Warning had darker, more serious songs. Diver Down included fun cover songs that brought in new fans. This constant change kept people excited about their music, and they gained more listeners every year. By the end of this streak, they had sold over 25 million albums in the US, becoming one of the best-selling rock bands ever. Van Halen wasn't just about their albums. Their music videos and live shows were unforgettable. At first, their videos were simple, but everything changed with the album 1984. The video for Jump became a huge hit. It was filmed in one day for only $5,000 and showed David Lee Roth dancing while the band performed. It was simple, but fans loved it, and it became one of the most played videos on MTV that year. Then came Hot for Teacher, a video that shocked everyone. It told a bold and funny story about kids fantasizing about their teacher. It also showed the band playing with high energy. Some people thought the video was too much, but it became incredibly popular and made Van Halen even more famous. Their live shows were just as exciting. In 1983, they played at the US Festival in California. Over 375,000 fans came to watch them, and the band was paid $1.5 million for their performance, a record at the time. Eddie Van Halen's guitar playing amazed everyone, and David Lee Roth's wild moves kept the crowd on their feet. One of the most famous moments in their career happened in 1984 when Eddie Van Halen played live with Michael Jackson. Eddie had recorded the guitar solo for Beat It in 1982, and it became a massive hit. At a show in Texas, Eddie surprised fans by joining Michael on stage to perform the song live. The performance was unplanned, making it even more exciting. The album 1984 was another huge moment for the band. Released on January 9, 1984, it became their most successful album ever. It included big hits like Jump, Panama, I'll Wait, and Hot for Teacher. 1984 sold over 10 million copies in the US, earning diamond status. However, the album also caused problems within the band. Eddie wanted more control over their music, and the heavy use of synthesizers led to fights with other members, especially David Lee Roth. Despite these issues, 1984 was a massive success. Jump became their first and only #1 song. It was different from their usual guitar-heavy style, with Eddie's catchy synthesizer riff as the main focus. The upbeat sound made it a favorite for many fans, even though the lyrics were inspired by something dark, a man thinking about jumping off a building. Unfortunately, the success of 1984 also led to the band's biggest breakup. In 1985, David Lee Roth left Van Halen. The tensions from recording 1984 and the pressures of fame were too much for the band to handle. Fans were heartbroken, as the original lineup had just reached the peak of their success. When David Lee Roth left Van Halen in 1985, it seemed like the band might fall apart. But instead, they brought in Sammy Hagar, and everything changed for the better. Sammy wasn't just a new singer, he brought a whole new energy to the band. Eddie Van Halen met Sammy through a Ferrari mechanic, of all people, and that meeting kicked off what fans call the Van Hagar era. Sammy was already famous on his own, and his arrival made Van Halen sound different. Their music started to include more keyboards and songs that worked great on the radio. Their first album together, 5150, came out in 1986. The single, Why Can't This Be Love, became a huge hit, and even the Warner Brothers boss said, "I smell money," when he heard it. This new era turned out to be Van Halen's most successful. Between 1986 and 1995, they released 4 albums in a row that went straight to number 1, 5150, OU812, for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge and Balance. They sold over 50 million records during this time and filled stadiums with fans year after year. But not everyone loved the changes. The band's music now had more ballads and love songs, and some fans missed the hard-partying rock sound they had with Roth. Critics even said Sammy made the band too pop. Still, Sammy made the band grow up in a way. They stopped being just a wild party band and became something more serious and mature. But things weren't perfect behind the scenes. By the 1990s, tension started to build between Sammy and Eddie. Losing their manager in 1993 made things harder, and Eddie's struggle with addiction caused more problems. Recording Balance in 1995 was especially tough, and the darker tone of the album showed how bad things were getting. By 1996, the tension got so bad that Sammy left the band, ending what had been their most successful chapter. After Sammy left, Van Halen went through a wild time with their lead singers. It all started back in 1985 when Roth left. The band tried to find a replacement, even asking Patti Smith from Scandal and Daryl Hall from Hall & Oates. But both said no. Eventually, they found Sammy, and he stayed for 11 years. When Sammy left in 1996, they tried reuniting with Roth for a greatest hits album. It didn't work out because of the same old personality clashes. Then they made a surprising choice: Gary Cherone from Extreme. Gary joined the band in 1996, but things didn't go well. They only made one album, Van Halen 3, and it flopped. Gary left in 1999, and the band went quiet for a while. Fans kept hearing rumors of reunions with either Roth or Sammy. In 2004, Sammy came back for a tour, but that didn't last long either. By 2005, they had split again. Throughout all of this, Eddie Van Halen was battling addiction. His struggles started young. Eddie once said his father told him to drink alcohol to calm his nerves before playing music. That bad advice led to a lifelong battle with drinking and drugs. During the 1970s and 1980s, as the band became one of the biggest in the world, Eddie started using cocaine and drinking heavily. He said it helped him deal with stage fright and fame, but things got out of control. By the 1990s, his addiction was causing serious problems. During the recording of Balance, Eddie's behavior became unpredictable, and it put a strain on his relationships, especially with Sammy. In 2006, Eddie hit his lowest point. He got hooked on Klonopin, an anti-anxiety drug, and fell off stage during a show. That incident pushed him into rehab, but the withdrawal was so tough that doctors put him on antidepressants. For a year, Eddie was barely functional, sitting at home watching Law and Order all day. Slowly, he started to recover. A new treatment using amino acids helped him get back on his feet, and his son Wolfgang became a huge part of his motivation to stay sober. Eddie's life was as wild as his music. In 1980, he met Valerie Bertinelli backstage at a Van Halen concert in Louisiana. Eddie was 25, a rock star at the top of his game. Valerie was just 20, a TV star famous for her role in One Day at a Time. Eddie was smitten right away. Valerie was charmed, even though his life was full of partying and chaos. Things moved fast. Just 8 months later, On April 11, 1981, they got married in a huge ceremony in California. Their wedding day was as crazy as you'd expect. Eddie was so nervous and unsteady that Valerie had to hold his hair back while he threw up before the reception. She stood there in her white dress, trying to calm him down. Somehow, they managed to pull it together and smile for their 500 guests, a mix of celebrities and rock legends. But behind the glitz, their relationship wasn't easy. Eddie's drinking and drug use caused problems. Valerie even admitted years later that she tried cocaine just to keep up with his lifestyle, something she regretted deeply. Still, they stayed together for 2 decades, becoming one of the most talked about couples of the 1980s and 1990s. In 1991, their lives changed forever when their son, Wolfgang, was born on March 16th. Eddie called him Wolfie and loved him fiercely. Wolfgang's birth gave Eddie some stability, at least for a while. Eddie even wrote a special guitar piece called 316 to celebrate his son's birthday. It was a soft, heartfelt song, different from the loud rock Van Halen was known for. Wolfgang showed musical talent early. Eddie was thrilled when he saw his son tap out rhythms as a little boy. He once joked that even a silly chicken commercial on TV proved Wolfie had rhythm. Eddie's marriage to Valerie ended after 20 years. They separated in 2002 and divorced in 2007. Even after the split, they stayed close for Wolfgang's sake. Then Eddie found love again with Janie Lisewski, a stunt woman and actress. They met in 2006 when she worked as his publicist. Their professional connection turned romantic, and in 2008, Eddie proposed with a Tiffany ring. Eddie and Janie married on June 27, 2009, at his home in California. It was a simple, barefoot ceremony with close family and friends. Wolfgang was the best man, and Eddie's brother Alex officiated. Valerie was even there, showing how they'd all stayed connected as a family. In 2006, Eddie Van Halen made a decision that surprised everyone. He replaced Michael Anthony, Van Halen's bassist for 32 years, with his 15-year-old son, Wolfgang. Fans couldn't believe it. Michael was loved for his powerful backing vocals and energy on stage, and many thought no one could replace him. What made things worse was how Michael found out. He read about it online. The band didn't tell him directly, which made the situation even more painful. Wolfgang joining the band wasn't just about music, it was about family. He had only been playing bass for 3 months, so people were skeptical. Some said it was nepotism, but Eddie believed in Wolfgang and said he brought something new and exciting to the band. Wolfgang's first show with Van Halen was on September 27, 2007, in Charlotte, North Carolina. On stage, the bond between Wolfgang and Eddie was clear. Eddie often showed how proud he was of his son. During one show in 2012, he even stopped playing to give Wolfgang a hug. But being in the spotlight at such a young age wasn't easy for Wolfgang. He admitted the pressure and criticism affected him deeply. Still, their father-son connection brought something special to the band. Wolfgang also had a big impact in the studio. For their 2012 album, A Different Kind of Truth, he convinced the band to revisit old demos from the 1970s and 1980s. Songs like She's the Woman and Big River came from those old recordings but were updated with a fresh sound. Some critics called it lazy, but Wolfgang defended the decision, saying great songs never get old. The album was a success, debuting at number 2 on the Billboard charts and showing that Van Halen still had it. Their final tour in 2015 was a bittersweet goodbye. It started in July in Washington and ended in October at the Hollywood Bowl. They played 25 songs each night, including hits like Jump and Runnin' with the Devil. as well as lesser-known tracks for die-hard fans. David Lee Roth's performances divided fans. Some loved his energy, while others thought his voice wasn't as strong as before. Behind the scenes, there were tensions. Roth sometimes changed lyrics or timing during shows, which frustrated Eddie. Still, the tour was a success, earning over $26 million and proving that Van Halen could still draw huge crowds. The final show at the Hollywood Bowl was emotional. It was the last time Eddie, Alex, Wolfgang, and Roth performed together. They ended the show with Jump, closing the book on one of rock's most legendary bands. It was the end of an era, but Van Halen's music and legacy will live on forever. Behind the scenes, Eddie's health was always a battle. At 44, he needed hip replacement surgery because of a condition that damaged his bones. People thought his intense performances and drinking made it worse. Then, in 2000, he got tongue cancer and had to have part of his tongue removed. He beat the cancer in 2002, but it returned in 2014, spreading to his esophagus. By 2017, doctors gave him just 6 weeks to live after finding stage 4 lung cancer. Eddie refused to give up. He traveled to Germany for experimental treatments, and those gave him 3 more years with his family. Even as his health got worse, Eddie kept fighting. In 2019, he survived a motorcycle accident and had surgery for a brain tumor. But cancer took its toll, and on October 6, 2020, Eddie died at 65. He passed away in Santa Monica, California, surrounded by his son Wolfgang, his wife Janie, and his brother Alex. The cause of death was a stroke, but Eddie also had pneumonia, a bone marrow disorder, and lung cancer. Before his death, he went through chemotherapy, and cancer had spread to his lungs and brain. Despite everything, he kept fighting until the very end. Eddie's death was a huge loss for rock music. He changed the way people played the guitar. His two-handed tapping technique inspired musicians all over the world. In his final months, Eddie was working on new music with his son Wolfgang, making sure his legacy would live on. When the news of Eddie's death came out, the world reacted with shock and sadness. Fans and musicians shared their grief online. Metallica called him a friend and an inspiration. Guitarist Joe Satriani said Eddie was a one-of-a-kind musician who changed rock forever. Even country singer Kenny Chesney shared stories about how Eddie inspired him. Tributes didn't stop at social media. On October 14, 2020, the Billboard Music Awards honored Eddie during their In Memoriam section. Many guitarists played in his memory. Around the world, fans created memorials, leaving flowers, guitar picks, and notes in places connected to Eddie's life. Sammy Hagar, who used to be in Van Halen, shared a very emotional tribute. He said that he and Eddie had made peace earlier that year. They talked through text messages and kept it private because Eddie didn't want people to know about his health problems. Sammy said their last conversations were full of love, which meant a lot to him. Eddie's son, Wolfgang, took on the responsibility of continuing his father's legacy. Wolfgang joined Van Halen as a bassist when he was only 15. After Eddie's death, he released a song called Distance as a tribute to his dad. The song showed home videos of Eddie and Wolfgang together and quickly became a big hit. Wolfgang is also working on releasing music Eddie left behind. He said there are a lot of tapes, and it will take time to go through them all. Wolfgang wants to share more of his dad's genius with the world. He is also managing the EVH guitar brand his dad created. In 2024, the brand launched a guitar Wolfgang helped design. It's called the SA-126 and combines classic sounds with modern performance, just like Eddie would have wanted. While Wolfgang is focused on continuing Eddie's legacy, he's made it clear that Van Halen as a band is over. In 2023, he stated, "Van Halen doesn't exist anymore as far as I'm concerned." He explained that the band can't go on without Eddie, and that fans need to process this loss just as he has. Wolfgang has no interest in a reunion or tribute tour with others taking his father's place. At the same time, Wolfgang is building his own career in music with his band, Mammoth WVH. He is also making sure Eddie's impact on music is remembered forever. Through his work, Wolfgang is honoring his father while making his own mark in the world of rock.